Hello, lovelies. I am Miss Phyllis Green of Greenwood ALC, and I am also known as Miss Thickiana. Um, and I am joining you today because I decided to do my very first video to discuss a myriad of things and maybe what we call, hide in plain sight type understandings and secrets that the education system will not readily explain to you. If you go sit down at their building and wait for somebody for hours, maybe somebody will come and give you a brief synopsis. But for the most part, they're hide in plain sight, but you don't really understand it. So I have to be honest, I had to get 2 degrees to understand it. So these schools do not necessarily make it readily understandable to parents. So I thought I'd get on and just discuss some of the, you know, basic understandings and also some of the intricate understandings that as a teacher, as a special education teacher, um, may be difficult to understand. And just to clarify and so that your child does get the most equitable education experience ever. Um, to begin, I would like to just discuss. I'm a little nervous. To begin, I would like to just discuss a little bit about me. I am a resigned teacher. I recently left this school classroom. Um, in another podcast, I'll let you know why. In another video or podcast. Um, but I left because I became frustrated at the quality of education young people were receiving, especially those with disabilities. That was one of my frustrations. Um, as a result, I started my own online tutoring company called Greenwood ALC at greenwoodalc.com. It's right there below on the screen. To provide the supports missing in the classroom, right? So, uh, when students need extra support, they can come to my website, things like that. Um, this this has also manifested into a larger vision of an online school. So that is something that my team and I are working on currently. I'm very excited about that, and I look forward to providing truly child first education. Um, to better equip our young learners for post secondary life. I began this podcast because in my 16 plus years of experience, I noticed that one of the biggest issues is that parents are not always understanding their rights for their child. Although I will discuss a wide range of topics, at least once or twice a week, I will be doing an education uncut. So this is Education Uncut. So I will always be doing an Education Uncut once or twice a week for parents so that they can understand some of the documents you receive from your school, for if you have a child with a disability, what rights you have under the law, um, what things may seem like a good idea, but may not be. Uh, and kind of going through, taking a very introspective look and going through those big, thick packets that you receive at an IEP meeting, or individual education plan meeting. Uh, so we will break we will break everything down. We're going to break it all down. That is what Education Uncut will be about. It is not to bash any school. That is not to I've worked at many, many different schools, and this is something I've seen throughout my career. So, this is not a bashing of them, it's really an understanding. So, it is because of my passion for wanting our young people to get the equitable services that they deserve, um, and particularly for our population that has special needs. So, today, what we will be discussing is three different governing laws about education and special education throughout the United States. So, there are more than three, but these are the three main guiding ones. So, we will talk about what's called the IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the ADA, uh, the which is what is this? The ADA, which is Americans with Disability Education Act, and the Section 504, which speaks to individuals who may have um, that prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. So if you have a physical disability, things like that. We will talk about what that means under Section 504. It doesn't necessarily have to be a physical disability, by the way. We'll talk more about that when I get into that section. And there are others. I'm sure you've heard of the ESSA, or better known as the No Child Left Behind Act, and the ATA, which is also the Assistive Tech Act. So we're going to talk about the main three, although there are others. We're going to talk about the top three. Okay. So let's just dive right in, right? So let's start with Individuals with Disability Education Act, right? So just a brief synopsis. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is a federal mandate, is a federal law um, that speaks regarding to our nation's special education governing process. The IDEA guides how states and school districts and public agencies provide early intervention services, special education, and related services to more than, no, actually, it's way more than 6.5 million eligible infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities. I would like to say that it's not just for infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities. If you are an adult student going to college, this can also apply to you as well. So, a lot, and I say that because of a lot of our young people, they go to college, and a lot of times they don't receive the services that they received in high school, and that's because they don't know how to go and find or advocate for themselves and find the specialized service department in a college. Colleges regulate a little bit differently, and we'll talk about that in another segment. Um, but yes, it can apply to individuals, not just youth. So that's one myth dispelled. Individuals with Disability Education Act is the main governing body when it comes to special education. Um, it is where we get into the bones of how to provide services, what is equitable for the diverse learner. When I say diverse learner, I mean students that have special needs, um, and how we equitably address their needs in the classroom, in the school building, and how we see to their appropriate transition in post secondary life, um, or any type of transition. Actually, if they're going from early childhood to kindergarten, how they transition that way. If they're going from uh, middle school to high school, how they're transitioning. Um, so all of those things are governed under this particular act. So if you're wondering why your child is failing in a class, um, and you take a look at their individual education plan and you see that they're supposed to be in a class with no more than 12 students, but for whatever reason, they're in a class with 25 to 30 students. So that is something you, as a parent, under this law, have every right to go to that department and say their education plan says that they need to be in a separate class with a smaller population and a teacher that specializes in working with students who have special needs rather than a general education class that is has multiple students, 25 to 30 students, and a teacher that is only licensed to teach a subject matter and not work with a diverse learning population. So, uh, that is where, as a parent and as a member of the individual education plan team, you have every right under this law to speak up and say, you need to move my child, all right? And not to move my child would be a violation of the IDEA. There's also the free and appropriate education. It also guides, with the free appropriate education is also known as FAPE. So if you've ever heard that word, you would know that that speaks to what how students are provided services under the law. So, for example, if your particular student requires transportation in order to get a free or appropriate education, then that is what the IEP team has determined. Then it is up to that school to set up transportation for your scholar. So that is under the FAPE part of the IDEA, right? So the next topic we are going to discuss is the Americans Disability Act, right? The Americans Disability Act, just a little brief synopsis, was passed in Congress and signed into law in July of 1990. The ADA is the first comprehensive declaration of equality for people with disabilities. The ADA protects the civil rights of people with disabilities in all aspects of employment and access to public services, such as transportation, guaranteeing access to public accommodations, such as restaurants, stores, hotels, and other type of buildings into which the public has access. This also speaks to the services provided in the school, because let's say you have a student that requires a wheelchair. The very obvious example is under the ADA, that school has to provide some type of ramp or device or way of allowing that student to transition throughout the school building, um, given their special need. So, uh, that and it also speaks to the prohibition of denying employment or firing a person based on a disability. One of the worst horror stories I ever experienced was, it was very unfortunate. It was kind of a catch-22. Is seeing a colleague that was terminated because he fell asleep in class. Now, from an administrative perspective, obviously you cannot fall asleep in class. That makes sense, right? Well, turns out that teacher had narcolepsy, and the school knew about it prior to hiring them, and still hired and terminated this person, knowing they had a disability they could not control. So, the more appropriate and equitable route would probably have been to put him in a position where he was not in charge of a number of students. That would have made more sense. But uh, under the ADA, that person could likely have brought a lawsuit and won, because this act says that you cannot bar a person. You cannot bar a person from aspects of employment and accessing public services, transportation, access to public accommodations, um, any of that. So if it's a public space, you cannot bar a person with a disability. And if it's a workspace, it also means that you cannot just hire and fire a person because they have a diagnosed disability. So that, in a nutshell, is the American Disabilities Act. And I will go more into detail um, a little bit later if you like. And we could talk about all of it. I mean, I'm going to give you some kind of just scenarios as to how this kind of manifests, and I've seen it manifest. And n- to be uninformed is to be unarmed. So it's very important that we just understand each one of these. The last one I'm going to talk about today is the Section 504. Right? Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So it's called commonly called just Section 504, but it is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Um, it was a civil rights law that prohibited discrimination on the basis of a disability. Uh, and it continues to play an important role in education, especially for students with disability who may not qualify for special education services under IDEA. So that means that, let's say you do not have a disability under a individual education plan. So maybe you don't have a problem with learning or anything that borrows you a disability that bars you from learning, but let's say you have diabetes, right? You need to take insulin on a regular basis. um, Section 504 protects your rights and what you need to have an equitable educational experience for your scholar, and to keep them from being barred from classroom. For example, at one school I worked for, uh, students, if you had so many tardies, it was considered, and this happens in most schools, so many tardies usually equals an absence. So um, I've seen it where students had a tardy, had enough tardies where they were going to be dropped from the class. But again, that student had diabetes, and they would go run to the nurse, get whatever they needed, and possibly be 2 or 3 minutes late for class because they had to go to the nurse. Well, those that teachers who were uninformed, a lot of times that's another thing. If teachers don't know, they don't know to probably not put in tardy. Most teachers I know, if they know the kid has a medical reason, they're not going to mark them tardy. But if you didn't know this particular case, the teachers did not know, so they kept marking the kid tardy. And when it came time to drop the kid from the class, that's when the parent spoke up and said, my student has diabetes, and but they never received a 504 plan, right? So under the law, even if they do not have a 504 plan yet, it is still the school's responsibility to service them under this law. And so therefore that student was not dropped. That student continued and they did fine. But after that scenario happened, the school did put in place a 504 plan for that student so that they can come to the nurse office at a certain time to get their medication and then go back to class without the interference of being marked tardy. Teachers were notified, and things went a lot smoother for that scholar. So and like I said, you also have many other laws, both federal and state. We'll get into state laws a little bit later, but you also have your No Child Left Behind. We talked about that. I'm sure everybody's heard that. And the Assistive Tech Act. Assistive tech is making sure students who maybe are nonverbal have a audio device, or having, for example, I we have students who are I've worked with students who are who have English as their second language, and they needed translation devices. So translation devices to support their learning. And with those, they were able to thrive. And so having the assistive tech they needed to support equitable learning. So just a couple of little experiences I just wanted to share with you. I already shared with you one about the ADA and the Individuals with Education Act. This one, like I said, is very much the cornerstone of how my entire career is governed. So the Individuals with Education Act um, was enacted in Congress by 1975. Um, and it basically shapes their requirements that shape what school systems have to do in order to receive federal funding um, for their school. So, and it's essentially because I know one thing, I don't know if everybody knows this, that um, states regulate education. Federal government does not. What federal government does say is that these federal laws must be followed. Um, but otherwise, like as long as you follow these rules, do it however you want to do it, right? So each state does things differently. I've been to states where they have pretty much all charter schools, no public schools. But so however each state decides to do it, as long as you follow these rules, you're fine. Um, so uh just to kind of give you, like, when it comes to servicing children, school age children, mm, it's I am just trying to, my computer's circling right now, so I wanted to make sure I get my notes. um, but if you're involved with the well-being of an infant, a toddler, or youth with disabilities, um, this particular law guides how schools must address the needs of those individuals. Um, so the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services, also known as OSERS, and the Office of Special Education Programs within the Department of Special Education. These are agencies that the federal government is responsible that oversees the IDEA implementation. So these are the offices you go to if you feel that the federal um, if you feel that federal mandates, the federal mandates are being violated for your child. So again, just to give you a quick synopsis of something I dealt with that was a violation of IDEA. So again, I trying not to speak to specific schools, because this is not about any particular school. This is about parents knowing their rights. That is it. I'm not going to do at least not on this, and on this video, I'm not going to do the angry teacher and all this other stuff. I'm not doing all that. But so this is really for you to understand. So, for example, let's take COVID. COVID happened, right? A lot of our students homes, doing work from home, virtual learning. Well, although we didn't have a choice in the matter, how we service those schools. One thing that happened when students began to come back into the classroom, we noticed that there was something on the individual education plans. It said compensatory services. Well, compensatory services are means that some type of service in the individual education plan was not provided because of the circumstances, which meant that the money that was given for those services must not be repaid. So obviously no institution, business of any kind wants to have to pay back money, right? But for example, if I'm virtual, I cannot do hand over hand, right? That could be a service that child needs, that scholar needs. If I am virtual, I cannot redirect behavior. I cannot read for a person. I can read for them virtually, but I cannot read for them in person. If that person needs monitoring or walk by their desk every 5 to 10 minutes, I cannot do that virtually. So those are issues that if that child struggled during that time period, then, and it was due to the services they were not provided, then that could be a violation of the IDEA. Again, Section 504, we've gone through, kind of give you an example of that as well. So I would love to hear your questions. If you would like me to go more in detail about any one of these laws, I would be glad to. I will make another video or do a podcast. I definitely want to, as soon as I get up enough followers, I will definitely be doing podcasts and talking with you all about each level, and just kind of giving a very basic level understanding, all right, of what we do, and what the law says, how we are guided as a school, as an institution, how teachers are guiding, what schools may not want you to know, and what things they will, for business purposes, say they gave you but never really explained to you. I will explain. Okay. That is my time for today, ladies and gentlemen. With you, I wish you all have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day. And in the words of Miss Kiana, keep it healthy, keep it happy, keep it thick. All right. Have a great day.